Welcome everybody to the session. I am Rhys Evans and it's a pleasure to introduce this lunchtime session which discusses the different things farmers can do to encourage wildlife on the farm. And there are 4 farmers of the farming network here today of the FFN, the chairman of the network in Wales, and he farms in Tyddinisa by Bethesda, Rochelle Lewis, who farms in Cwmelan, Gethin Owen, who runs a farm Lantyrefail by Abergele, and Rhian Pierce, who farms Plas Dolfen by Llangenhafal in Denbighshire. And so Gethin and Rhian will discuss some of the things which farmers can do on the farm to encourage wildlife.
Hedges are a key feature of our landscape that provide a historical link to centuries of farming activity, a physical link across the countryside, and a safe way for wildlife to move through the landscape. Next slide, please. This diagram shows how, for farmers, they prevent soil erosion and shelter livestock. They support populations of pest predators and provide a home for pollinators adjacent to crops. They're a key component in the ecological jigsaw. For the environment, they store carbon and capture pollutants and provide wildlife with a larder and somewhere to breed. Next slide. Here are just a few of the creatures that rely on our hedgerows: lesser horseshoe bats, redwings, bullfinches, bees, hedgehogs and field mice. All use them for navigation, shelter and food throughout the year. The best hedges for wildlife have a varied character along their length and will attract a wider range of wildlife. And planting fruit and nut trees such as crabapple, elder and hazel in the hedge line increases the food value. Next slide. Flower buds on many hedge plants form on second year. Oh, you need to go back one. Form on second year growth, so they don't form if they're cut every year. Pushing back cutting dates to as late as February is possible, and extending the cutting cycle to 3 years in rotation, so over 66% of the hedge has berries and flowers each year, has huge benefits for a range of insects, including crop pollinators, as spring blossoms are a vital resource. You can also encourage insects on the sunny side of a hedge by cutting it less often. There's plenty of positive steps for hedgerow management that you can do cheaply with minimal impact on the farm, as long as you can break the neat and tidy hedge trap. See what wildlife you've got and manage your hedges to encourage them in a way that fits with your farming pattern. And manage hedges over your lifetime, not on an annual basis. Things like letting blackthorn suckers grow along field edges will provide young shoots for brown hair streak butterfly to lay their eggs on. And then just cut a percentage of them back every 3 to 5 years. Leaving a 2-metre buffer strip will protect the hedge from inputs and provide habitat for wildlife. Where there are mature trees, extend that buffer to protect the roots from damage during cultivation. Next slide. Have a diverse range of hedges at different stages of succession, from newly planted, coppiced or laid, to mature with future hedgerow trees establishing. Incrementally cut the hedges so they're not cut back to the same point, so they expand over time before being coppiced again. And don't hesitate to seek advice from conservation organisations who can help with information. I got this. If you've got a gappy hedge like this one, which isn't stock-proof and provides little shelter or interest for wildlife, it's probably a good idea to coppice it back in sections over a few years and plant up any gaps using locally sourced native hedge plants in early winter when the ground is warm and moisture is available, protecting them with tree tubes and mulch mats if needed. The coppicing will reduce competition for the new plants and produce a thicker bottomed hedge as the coppice regenerates. The good news is that there are 2 rounds of the Glastier Small Grants application windows in Wales in January, February and May, June 2021, which have a £4.50 a metre funding available for planting new hedges or for restoration, plus a contribution to protective fencing, so you need to get applying. If you can spare the land, it's good to have livestock fencing 2 to 3 metres out from the centre line, as seen here, to give a good thick hedge protected from grazing. Next slide. Here are some good examples of a hedge in full bloom after 3 years' growth and a restored hedge on a nature-friendly farming network member's farm. Hedgerow trees are particularly important for wildlife. Old trees will provide space for hole-nesting barn owls and tree sparrows and bats and the insects that they feed on, as well as standing deadwood. Rotten tree stumps, hedge banks and gaps around root systems may be used for hibernation by snakes, lizards, frogs and toads. They're so important they need protection and a long-term plan to replace them. To promote succession, note any native saplings in the hedge that haven't been cut in previous operations and leave these during future trimming. Choose species that are present as hedgerow trees in your area, such as oak, rowan, cherry or willow. Next slide. People think a 3-yearly cut will damage their flails and take too long. So here are a couple of alternative machines now becoming more readily available. A Slane Track 1.8 metre fingerbar hedge trimmer is fitted to a tracked excavator. It cuts in one single pass, so no going backwards and forwards, damaging the ground and mangling the hedgerow like a flail. Cutting involves staying in one position to cut 4 to 5 metres off the hedge side and then from the top, then moving forward to the next section, giving good control. Tree shears, which again can be attached to the digger, basically grab hold of a tree, branch or shrub, pulling it across a cutting blade. The cut-off material can then be placed wherever you want. You can fill gaps with brash or stack it out of the way into wildlife habitat piles, sort for firewood or chip it. This machine can really help with managing bigger grown-out hedges. Just make sure not to get carried away with tree shears. Those who have done so have given them a bit of a bad reputation. Take a long-term approach and don't blitz all your hedges at once. Next slide. One of the key advantages over a flail is the very clean, neat cut, which is less damaging, which is really important when you're managing hedges on an extended rotation. With larger material, it's best to finish off stumps with a chainsaw. Farmers using these techniques have found that the total cutting cost for one hedge to be roughly the same if the hedge is cut once a year or once every 3 years, and using a track digger causes less compaction and field damage. Next slide. So this has just been a very quick chat about hedges, but if you want any further information, please visit the Nature Friendly Farming Network for links. Diolch. Next up, we've got Saoirse Lewis from the Allen Valley, who is in the Nature Friendly Farming Network steering group, and she's talking about hay meadows.
Hello, thank you, Hilary. Yes, I wanted to talk a little bit about the hay meadows and why I think they're really important. Hay meadows have evolved over centuries, and I really think people need to see the benefits of them, because they're a huge opportunity to tackle climate change, the health and nature crisis, and it's an opportunity not to be missed. And with 97% decline since the 1930s, we really have an opportunity as farmers to reverse this and to see the benefits that it has for our businesses as well as for the wildlife we have. Next slide. So what are the benefits of hay meadows? So for us as farmers, we see the benefits of hay meadows being that they're quite resilient to weather changes, extremes in hot and the cold. They take only one cut in a year. They're great for wildlife and visually heartening, and that adds much interest to the farm. I feel good knowing what the stock are eating here, and this goes into the food chain. It's also more sustainable within our upland farming system, so we're not needing to add in inorganic fertilizers or export fodder in. It keeps the farm system in an equilibrium, and we maintain sort of the amount of food that we've got for the stock over the winter time. So it's what the land can produce. The herbs are believed as well in the hay to be good for the stock and nature's own medicine and wormers. And meadow hay is rich in protein, minerals and amino acids. It gives the ground a period of rest, and it locks in the carbon for soil structure. Hay meadows were not created for their biodiversity, but as fodder for stock. Over this time, nature has adapted and thrived alongside man's more subtle management of these precious places. Yep, good slide. So of course you can see from this picture that it is, food for our sheep. Not just that, it actually is portable, so we can take the small bales hay up into the hills, which is very beneficial. And I really think that the whole haymaking side of things has been very much part of the Welsh farming culture, and the names of our fields and things like that are all around that. So next slide. So what do we do to manage our hay meadows? Well, really, we graze them most of the year, really, through winter and spring. Sort of coming up to May, we take the sheep off it. So we take the sheep off at the 1st of May, and we aren't allowed to cut because most of our meadows are under sites of special scientific interest. So we don't cut till after the 19th of July, but in the uplands of mid Wales, where they've built all these dams, we don't really get much opportunity anyway to cut hay before the 19th of July because it always seems to be raining. So when we do get round to cutting the grass, we will cut it and we will mow it and ted it and throw the hay round a bit to dry it out. And that takes usually about 3 days. And we try to get small bales, but if the weather is a little bit against us, we will take silage as well. Yeah, we would prefer our hay meadows, and we spend a lot of time at them now, finding out more a bit about their soil structure and their pH to ensure that we can balance the wildlife and the need to have fodder for the animals. So next slide. So we would call our hay meadows unimproved hay meadows. So they haven't really had much nutrients added into the system, only cattle muck that goes back in to keep the grass growth steady and good for the soil. We have yellow rattle and eyebright in the meadows, and they've got low soil fertility, but they really are a great complement to the farm. The next sort of type of grassland you get is semi-improved, so you've got some interesting plants in it, and moves can be made to increase the diversity in this by getting some more seeds into the mix once you cut the hay, which is quite easy to do. And then, of course, the other grasses that we're used to seeing in our countryside are the improved, and these are the very bright green, lush, even sward sort of fields. So they're a bit more difficult to get back into being species rich, but it can be done with careful management. So I tend to spend a lot of time, next slide. So if you can get everything right with the flowers, then the soil, the flowers, the insects, and then the birds, all the wildlife just comes. And that really is telling us that we're doing a good job, really, if we can get that all in balance. I spend a lot of time on the Magnificent Meadows Wales project, which you can find out a lot about if you wanted to have a hay meadow or something. And yeah. I'm going to pass you on to Gethin Owen to talk about the benefits of winter stubbles and species-rich lays. Thank you.
Iawn, diolch, Sorcha.
Thank you. Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Gethin Owen, and I'm from Abergele, and we farm in Nanturefel. There's a photo of it there on the left-hand side on the screen. And what I'm going to talk about is a little bit about what we do here in Nanturefel and the changes we have done over the last few years. Up until 12 years ago, we farmed beef and sheep, but until 12 years ago, it was 150 acres. We had dry grass, and it was really used. We used fertilizer, and yes, and I had the opportunity to go on the Tir Gofal cynllun in 2008, and it was a no-brainer at the time. I was conscientious. And I knew the value of the farm. I knew that the value of the farm, as far as wildlife concerned, was quite low, and I wanted the opportunity to be paid to create more varied habitat for wildlife on the farm. The option we took was to grow spring wheat. So this was something which everybody through Wales were doing up until the early 1970s. And since then, we as Welsh farmers, well, we have specialised more in grass and dairy and beef farming. So really, we've gone back to a system quite similar to what everybody did up to about 50 years ago. And in my opinion, the changes which have occurred, and that change from specialising in what we're doing, it's more than a coincidence that it's happened at the same time as the diminishing wildlife on the land. The next slide, please. Right, so what we've done, so the farm is about 150 acres, and the land which we can harvest, a lot of the farm is too rocky and steep. We harvest about 60 acres, so that then is we've established a cycle, a 4-year cycle. So the first year we grow in the spring, and then we stubble over the winter, and then 3 other years of herbal laid, or you've got some pink clover on the right hand side there. And then it's been transformed into being a large farm, and without doubt the wildlife which is on the 15 acres of spring wheat which we grow every year, well, there's wildlife on that 15 acres, and within the cycle it is more than the rest of the farm, all of the rest of the farm. It's surprising how varied habitat and resources you have for wildlife. The next slide, please. I mentioned the process of growing. Now, we have tried to, well, more recently, we have begun with oats, spring oats, and then I see with oats that it's very easy to grow. I'm not an arable farmer, and oats grows like weeds, really. And what I want to do is to sow in March and then close the gate and go back to it in September. So that's what we do. That is the beginning of our cycle, to sow the oats. And then, whilst the oats, as I said, it's easy to grow, so we just give it a little bit of manure. If you give it too much manure, it grows too much, and it begins to kind of collapse as it grows. So a field of wheat, it does create a habitat, various habitats which change during the year from the minute it's sowed until when it's turned the following spring. So when the wheat is growing, it's not injected or anything, and you do have a canopy of weeds, and then as the wheat grows, that creates a canopy for birds and hares and that type of thing. Then it grows and it matures, and at the beginning of September then we harvest it, and then I'm not too concerned about how much grain we get. So for us, really, the most valuable thing is the straw we have. We have about 150 tons. It's 150,000 tons. So the value of the straw means a lot. And it reduces costs, of course, substantially. Then, After harvesting in September, it's left then, it's left until the following spring. So the photo on the left, that is the photo of the field. It's nothing to look at, but there are a lot of various birds, gibbinks, and there's more wildlife there than on the rest of the farm altogether. And what I see with leaving stubble over the winter is, well, I'd say that the ideal in the arable farming world, really, there's no value to keeping a field over the winter. It doesn't produce anything. But as you see the photo on the right-hand side there, you have the volunteers, you have the grain, then you have a little bit of weeds growing as well. And then in a way, that looks after the soil for the winter. And in the spring, there is food there. You can turn sheep and cattle onto the land. So that's what we tend to do, is to get sheep and cattle to graze what has regrown before then we turn field again. Next slide, please. Ah, yes. So I'd say that some of the challenges which I found as going back to this kind of system is, I'm sure you ask why everybody doesn't do it if it reduces your costs and makes the business more than it is. Weather is one factor. The window for harvesting, it's quite limited. And we have had one write-off in a way since, well, in 12 years. And so if you have one write-off in 1 year out of 10, well, we can have a September where it rains every day. Another challenge is to have the machines. You need a combine to do the harvesting. There isn't much of them around. Combines these days, they don't like narrow lanes and gates and narrow gates. So finding a combine and bringing into the farm can be a challenge. And then the processing and the storage. If you want to feed the grain to animals, you need to have storage. The storage which Farm Assurance is happy with. And then possibly you'll need to dry it. And then, well, those are some of the challenges. And I think that overcoming some of these challenges, it's something in the future with post-cap and the support we have from the government to help us to, well, to help us through cooperation to try and establish systems such as this on our farms. So there we are. I'll pass you on now to Rhian Pierce, who's going to mention farming and birds. Hello, everybody. I am Rhian Pierce. I work part-time for the RSPB and I spend the rest of my time farming Rhwydwaith. So today I'm going to talk about some birds on the farms. There's been lots of good ideas of things you can do in the chats we've had before me. So I'll try not to repeat myself. So we've got a few photos of rare birds here, which can be found on farms in Wales. You've got the peewit, and then you've got the different birds there you can see. Rare birds next. So we begin with the ring ouzel. These nest, as you can see on the map, it shows that they nest on rocky land in the mountains, and they depend on places which have been grazed quite a lot so that they can reach the insects and beetles and things in the soil. So in the highlands, in places where livestock have been taken from the hills, the vegetation is too thick really for them to feed and get hold of the bugs in the soil. Next, we've got the chough. We have most of the choughs, then we have more choughs in Wales than anywhere in the world, and they nest along the coasts, the Welsh coastline, and also in the Welsh hills. There are fewer and fewer in the mountains and hills these days because they depend upon, well, they don't want much grass and etc. to reach the beetles and insects in the soil. Next is the lapwing. So the lapwing depends on quite soft soil, not wet, but soft, so that they can again poke into the soil to get at the bugs and insects. And I saw one photo where there was a kind of water feature created in the fields. Unfortunately, over the years, a lot of land, farmland, has been dried out for very good reasons. So that you can have access to the land for hay, etc. I understand why it's been dried out. But then we need to create wet areas for the lapwing. Next, finally, out of these four individual birds, is the curlew. We've lost 80% of curlews from Wales since 1994. And there are a few reasons for this. One is that they've lost suitable habitats. Again, they need kind of wet land to probe into the soil to get at the bugs. But the thing, well, the same, out of these four birds which I mentioned, the four of them nest on the ground. So they're all vulnerable to prey, especially foxes and crows. So if you have these rare birds on your land, I'd really support you to try and control foxes and crows, because lots of farms feed inside these days. So they haven't got reasons themselves at the time of lambing, etc., to go out and try and control crows and foxes. Next. So what we see is important with all of the rare birds in Wales is mixed grazing. Everybody knows that different livestock graze in different ways, and this creates a tufty vegetation and a variation in the vegetation, which gives places suitable for them to feed. And another reason why mixed grazing is important, we know that mixed grazing does cut the life cycle of intestinal worms. So farmers with sheep and cattle use less wormers if you've only have one kind of livestock. We know now that wormers and fermentics, which kills the intestinal worms, also have an effect on the amount of worms and bugs and insects in the ground. So all of those birds which I've just shown you, the four different breeds, they all depend on soil invertebrate. So by grazing with different kinds of animals, you don't just save money and not have to use so much worming, but you also create more of a variety of bugs in the soil. Next. Fine. So this is a full picture of this kind of land. This kind of land isn't worth much, but it's worth a lot to wildlife. It's just land with a mixture of gorse and fern, etc. on, and gorse is one of the flowers with most bugs and insects and small insects in the countryside, and it's so important for linnets and various birds. And one thing I would say is to keep the gorse on the land if you can, if you possibly can. Next. And now there are photos of woodlands here. Unfortunately, a lot of woodlands have been fenced off by Glastir, and much of the stock has been, all the stock has been kept out. And this has created a lot of jungle in the woodlands. And there are some breeds of birds, the wood warbler and the pied flycatcher. They need to be on the ground, and they need open spaces. So if you can, still graze your woodlands. Make sure that you have a gate put in so there's somewhere the animals can have water. And so just try and keep a little bit of order on the bramble and ferns which grow there. Next. Oh, that's the end. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rhian. And thank you, Hilary, Sosha, and Gethin as well, for these most interesting presentations. And thank you all for listening. Of course, this is just a taster today of what agriculture and how agriculture and wildlife can go hand in hand. It's a very interesting area. And if you want to know more about this topic, then there are resources there up on the screen for you to see. If you go online, you'll have the contact details for some of the institutions and bodies you can see there online, which are to do with agriculture and wildlife.